We are live. Welcome. It's Tevis, and I'm here for another Game Changer chat. I have with me Valerie Van Galder, who is just a freaking media rock star, film studio maven, who's so much more than anything she's ever done. And before we dive into that, I just wanted to give a couple things. For one thing, I started this series because I wrote a book after coaching a couple hundred high performers who actually kind of broke my heart because they were such rock stars in life. And yet when I would sit down to coach them, it would really become apparent that whatever the gap was between how things were going at work or pursuing goals or just being happier, that they had really lost connection to themselves. And so I wrote this book to help people connect with self. And I started this series because I wanted to bring to the light and to popularize and to show off how many people are amazing in work, amazing in life, and they stay really connected to themselves and maybe shed some light on their secrets that they've learned along the way. So I'm really thrilled to have Val here. Before we get rolling, we are streaming across Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn. And so with all those feeds coming in, all of them offer a chat opportunity. And if you put a question in the chat and we don't answer, it's not because we don't want to, it's because something in technology world has not been perfect. So forgive us if we don't. And we will definitely circle back and answer any questions that come our way. So Valerie, thank you for being here.
Hi, so I haven't seen you since a wedding in 2012.
I know, and we both look exactly the same.
Well, I don't know if you remember, I had like 13 broken bones, so I was in a sling.
That's right. I vaguely remember that wedding. It was one of those weddings. Well, I love to kick off these conversations because I know that you don't have this problem, but a lot of people have the problem when they're like talking in an interview type capacity, they get real stiff. And I know that's not true for you, but just for kicks, what was your favorite thing to do as a young one, as a little child?
Oh my gosh, that's so easy. All I ever wanted to do, well, can I say three things?
Yeah.
I like paint, I like to read, and I like to look at flowers.
Paint, read, and look at flowers. Do you know, I've had 22 people on this show. You're my 22nd.
Uh-huh.
And no one's ever said the same thing.
Oh, interesting.
Ever.
Not one time. What's the most, what was the thing you found the most surprising of all your guests? The one thing.
Do you know the conversation I got into with Abby Aurors, who's just amazing. Like she's a rap artist. She's a corporate executive still, and she just has this whole other life outside of it. But she said as a little one, she liked to read the album covers. And I did too. I still have all my vinyl, right? That just holding them and seeing the poetry of the lyrics, and how the expression of the artwork would really make it this experience. And then she'd be hearing it at the same time. Like that really struck me. We kind of don't get that on Spotify.
Very true. No, album art was amazing. Like, do you remember all the Elton John albums and the Yes albums? And yeah. I have them all still.
Right here, yeah, I got them right here.
Like Joni Mitchell's, painting Deja Vu for Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Young. Yeah, amazing.
Scary Monsters by David Bowie. What a great album!
Oh, all of them, and they're all so good. Aladdin Sane, yeah, the best.
Well, so we're gonna go down music reverie, but first we're gonna go down Val reverie.
Okay.
So these folks may or may not know that you have been, that you worked through PR into marketing, that you scaled the mountains of the studio world. And I was thinking about it because I've just known you as Val. But I was thinking about your career on paper, and it's kind of a fantasy. It's kind of an aspiring film executive. Like, if you want to work on the business side of movies, what you have done is fantastical. What's been your biggest obstacle? What did you have to overcome to be this almost hard to believe, bigger than life success?
That is such an interesting question that no one's ever asked me before. I think, honest to God, I had to overcome everything. I had to overcome a childhood. I grew up in Orange County, which is Southern California. Like a nice upper middle class family. But my dad, unbeknownst to us growing up, had a pretty severe depression. So there was a lot of really good times in our house and sometimes difficult times. So the net effect on me as the oldest was I was quite parentified with my sisters, and I had a lot of social anxiety. So I was really shy. So when I talk to you about reading and painting, I self-soothe, as I know now as a grown-up, by being kind of introverted and creative. And my mother was quite extroverted and had really big goals for her eldest to be a normal person. And I was anything but. I didn't fit in. I was really had a hard time making friends. I had just a couple friends, and I was very socially awkward. I didn't like going to parties. And when I was, and like, one of my most horrifying memories of most of my school year, every year, was that I couldn't say here in school. Like, I would have to practice under my voice because I was too scared. I didn't ever want anyone looking at me. I didn't like being the center of attention. I didn't like answering questions in class. And it was a problem, and it was an issue for me most of my life. And so the irony of it all is that I became like a professional talker in my career is kind of shocking. And and so that, I think that was my biggest obstacle. Also, getting into the career I had, I went to UCLA, and I was an English major, and my mom and dad were always on me of like, what are you going to do with you? Like, there was a big joke back then. It's like, English majors can't get jobs. And I had a button on my jacket that said, I don't know what I'm going to do when I graduate. I was panicked. My dad panicked me about everything. He panicked me about getting into college. He panicked everything. My dad was a very anxious, high achieving, wonderful man, but his anxiety was like at 11 all the time. And he really passed it on to me. So when I was getting out of school, they told me I needed to get an internship. And I somehow like wandered into this PR agency and found my calling. And I didn't even really know what PR was, but it turned out I really was good at it. And I really, somehow my social skills improved a little bit. And so it's, when people meet me and know me as only Valerie Van Galder, the studio executive, they're really surprised to find out who like the person inside is. And so that's the honest answer. I had to overcome a crippling shyness and anxiety to become the person that I actually eventually became.
Girl, I so relate. I grew up with speech impediment and incredibly shy. And that I have grown up to do this, that I've grown up to present in Spanish and Portuguese. It's just like, if you had told me that would be possible for me in those moments, I wouldn't have believed you. I'm curious too, like, how transparent have you always been about that? Because one of the things that I find with a lot of high performers is that, like, we were talking about the mask. We did have a moment before we got on this, right? And we were talking about the mask, and you said you've really never had a mask. And is that true all the way through? I mean, have you always been transparent about depression being a part of your upbringing or shyness?
That's a good question. I don't think I didn't announce it to my bosses when I was interviewing for jobs. I didn't know about the depression piece until I was 30 years old. My dad had a psychotic break after he had a very simple surgery. And my mother chose not to share that he had actually been depressed our whole life. So the depression thing, it felt like a glitch when I was 30. It was like a 2-year period where he was just kind of gone, and then he came back. But after my mother passed away, he had a psychotic break, and I was tasked, as were my sisters, with taking care of him. And that's when a lot of things started to come to light. And so what happened, and I was talking about this earlier on my thing I do, I became very activated to help other people in my position because I was so stunned at how stigmatized mental illness was, how scary it was, how difficult it was to get him help. It's a very long story, and I won't go into here, but I suddenly realized that a big part of like the issues I faced in my childhood were because my mother didn't feel comfortable talking about what was going on in our house. And she was very, very private. And she was literally like, she was in the closet about who our family was and what our life was like. So we didn't have access to things like therapy. My dad, tried to kind of, I think, work his way through it. But it was always very confusing to me, like what was going on, because things seemed right on the surface, but there were a lot of things that didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And so I didn't talk about it because I didn't know about it. Like I knew that when I was in college, there were a lot of days I couldn't get out of bed, and I think I probably had low-level depression my whole life. But because of my family, because of my role in the family, like I was the big girl who had to fix everything. It didn't occur to me I was allowed to take care of myself, or I didn't even know how. So I'm incredibly strong. I'm really resilient, and I'm really fierce. And I just muscled through. And then at some point when the truth came out, and this was in 2008 after my mom passed away, then I started unraveling a lot of things that made no sense, and my life and my personality and my anxiety started to like make a little bit more sense to me.
Wow. So like all those pieces of the mosaic just started to.
Yeah. And they continue to. Like I learn every day. I think there's just so much more knowledge. There's so much more information available. The internet's actually incredibly, invaluable in that. Sometimes to a fault. Sometimes I'm like, I've diagnosed myself by breakfast, like I have ADHD. And I think I had undiagnosed ADHD quite honestly as a child. It was hard for me to do things that were boring. So, but I didn't talk about it because I didn't know about it. And I think it's helpful for someone like me to talk about it, because I've always wanted to be a role model for younger people, and I am, and I have mentored a lot of people because I had a very unconventional career, because I was an unconventional person, and I can't say I embraced it. I didn't know how to be anything else. And so I think, and I remember, we haven't gotten there yet, but when I got my big job at the studio, I didn't really want it. I wasn't sure. I did know that I didn't handle stress well, and I wasn't sure I was up to the task. My boss was quite insistent that I was. And I remember saying I was going to take it because I wanted a young woman to look at me and say, wow, how did that quirky woman, that wasn't a girl, who, doesn't wear a business suit and sometimes wears jeans to work and often says silly things in meetings and, isn't like everybody else, get as far as she did. Like maybe I can get there too. So I think, my value to society is probably like, you know what, you may have been a misfit and you may not have, been on the track that you think you have to be on to be a success in life. But if you work hard, if you're passionate about what you do, I showed up every day really excited and grateful for the career I was somehow handed. And that was kind of how that's what I'd like my legacy to be if I was ever going to have one.
Wow. Do you know, I love it that that you said that you got there by muscling through, but you also mentioned early on self-soothing. That you, from a very young age, just instinctively knew that you had to take care of yourself.
I didn't call it that though, and everyone made fun of me. Oh, they didn't make fun of me. It's funny you say that, because years ago, someone wrote a profile about me in one of the Hollywood trades, and they interviewed my first boss, who I'd worked for when I was in college and then after college. And she said, Val's the only person in Hollywood who has hobbies, because I was a painter and a knitter and a baker. And it really, it made me an outlier. People thought it was weird. And now like I said, now I know, oh, that was how I got through childhood. Like I always was creating things, making things. You can see, I just like with my hands, it was how I managed my anxiety. But that wasn't what I was doing. I just enjoyed it. I just loved creativity. I loved colors. I loved learning things. And it made me, I wasn't that driven the way other people were. Like I had a job once. I actually was an intern at Facebook at a very elderly age. And I met one of their big clients, this woman who worked at Unilever, and we had some mutual friends. And she said, how can I have your career? Like, I want your career. She's younger. And I said, no one can have my career, because she's like, I want to grow up and be you. And I was like, well, I only wanted to be me. I was never like, oh, and then I want this job, and then I'm going to take that one. And then how I'm going to angle and, be Machiavellian and get that one, which was what I was surrounded by, as you can imagine, in Hollywood and the companies I was working in. And I didn't know how to play that game, and I didn't play that game. So I can't really give any kind of advice other than, I don't know, be yourself and hope it works out.
I love that though, because for one thing, this often happens when I talk to folks who are in it. they don't have any acknowledgement of what gives them joy. They have no, I can ask them what pisses you off and they can tell me 30 things.
Right.
But if I say to them point blank, what brings you joy outside of maybe spouse or family, or maybe not, right? It becomes this really uncomfortable moment. It was funny. I was running a coaching program at Bloomberg, and my client asked me, she goes, so what do you think's really going on? And I said, without even thinking, I said, it's poverty of the soul, right? Where you don't have, right?
Well, it's funny you say that, because when I left Sony, I left, we're kind of jumping all over the place. I think we're just having a conversation, so that's all right. I'm talking to you like a friend. I left Sony in 2009 because I'd been taking care of my father for about a year, and my mother had passed away a couple of years before, and I had a long distance relationship in England, and I just couldn't handle. I mean, I literally crumbled under, like, I finally broke. Like, all my resilience, all my strength, I lost it one day in a meeting. And I said to my bosses, I was like, I can't make it through the end of the year. I had 4 months left on my contract. And I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. I need to go take care of myself. And so I signed up for a sewing class, and I signed up with an intuitive therapist. I had both those things on the same day. And I went to this intuitive therapist, and she said to me, your soul has left your body and it's not coming back till you create some safe space for it. And I think she was right. And so I went on a real spiritual journey. I was consulting. I left a job, and I'm still working, with some film directors. But I went and I pursued all the things I'd been wanting to do my whole life. I went on a knitting retreat. I went on an arts retreat in New Hampshire. I drove through Maine and met alpacas. I went to a writer's retreat in Cape Cod. I unplugged so much for the first time in my entire life, because I started working while I was in school. And I realized, like, all these things have been lying dormant in me, and I just never really had enough time for them. And so I knew exactly what brought me joy. It's just the world tells you that you got to keep making money. You got to keep being successful. If you get to the top of the climb to that mountain. And honestly, I'll tell you another thing. So I had given them a lot of notice at Sony, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it, because I was so tired. And the LA Times called me one day, this journalist, and I used to be a publicist, and I should have known better, but she called me and she said, I heard you're leaving the studio. And I said, I am. And oh, no, I didn't. I said, may I call you back? And I went to my boss's office and I said, because I never really understood the lame duck syndrome. I was so naive. Like, I'd been in that company so long, and I really felt like they were my family. And I didn't know about being a lame duck or that any of those. I just was so like, this is my job, and I'll do it till I don't do it. And I was I was criminally naive for as long as I'd been in the studio system. And so I went to my boss's office and I said, hey, so-and-so called, and it'd make my life, maybe we should just like out it. And maybe we should say I'm leaving, and that my friends, my colleague who I'd chosen to replace me is replacing me. And that might make life easier, because I said, it's just really awkward right now. I mean, I feel very awkward when I come to the office in the morning. And he said, great. And then when I called her back, she said, I said, okay, I resigned. And then she said, I've never told this story, but I kind of want to tell it, because you know what? I'm tired of all of us women having to live in shame. Yeah. So she said, you're not quitting, you got fired. And I said, excuse me? And she said, yeah, you got fired. The head of the studio doesn't like you. And I said, well, she may not, but actually I quit. And if you ever read this article, I sound so, you can feel the stress in my voice, because suddenly I was on the record and I was being told I was lying about something that I wasn't lying about. And she said, no one quits those jobs. And I was like, well, I guess I'm the first, because everybody before me and after me had gotten fired. And I said, okay, you can tell. I said, maybe they didn't want to renew my contract. That's entirely possible, but you can't really prove a negative. I said, I resigned. Yeah. And I was really upset, and I was crying, and I called, they said, wow, can you call this journalist? Because I just thought, God, after all I'd done for them, I'd extended my contract a year at their request. I'd trained my successor. I was like, I cannot be a better soldier. I showed up every day to work when my mother was dying of cancer, and then drove an hour to my parents' house to feed my parents dinner. My dad was in and out of a psychiatric ward. I was traveling all over the world. And I just couldn't, like, I was like, I'm a human. Like, I've had to so many times in my life say to people, and one of my friends still teases me, I'm like, I'm actually a human, like with feelings, and, needs and wants. I was not just put on this planet to be a executive. Like I existed before any of this. And for some reason, it was really like everything about it was confusing to me. So candidly, I always knew who I was, but it was always at odds with, like, I didn't understand anybody. I didn't understand how they were motivated. So when you brought up my soul, my soul's always been a little bit confused about a lot of things on this planet.
Yeah.
Very honest answer.
No, I love it, because I've got this strong contention that staying connected to your soul is part of how you stay free. Like, even if you sign a contract and even if you work for the man, right? Yeah. Like, staying connected to your soul is part of our job.
Yeah. And being true to yourself, I think. Yeah. And it's not easy. The world doesn't make it easy, I don't sometimes. Well, when you're at the level that I was at, where everybody's trying to get your job and they don't believe you actually just can't do it anymore and you don't necessarily want it anymore.
So you were done. I
was in that moment. I have to say, right now, with a lot of hindsight, what I realized is that there's a quote from Banksy that I love, which is, when you get tired, learn to rest, not quit. I needed compassionate leave, which is what I needed. And actually, I had an executive coach who told my bosses that. They said, this woman's really, really tired and you need to give her some time off. And so I asked if I could have a few months off, and they said no. So, for any boss who has a high achieving employee, if they ask for time off, give them the time off, because they could have kept me. Now I know I wasn't done. I was burnt out. I mean, I just was like, I was juggling, and I was sad. I was grieving. I was scared. And, that's very hard to be marketing movies and, be the face of a movie studio and the raw marketing gal when your dad's in a mental hospital. It was brutal.
Yeah. And all of that takes time and space. Mm-hmm. And our culture doesn't really say that grief exists, much less the amount of energy that it takes. Yeah. So we have to kind of
I feel like there's more language around it. I feel the reason I feel comfortable talking about it is I feel like it is actually coming out a lot more. I think people are doing, I think corporations are starting to even have like compassionate workplace, seminars. And I was talking to someone the other day who's a musician. I was like, I know I was talking to you, Tevis, but like, I think what you're doing, I think it's going to become more of a trend. I think people are going to start to understand that, especially after the year we've just had, that if we don't treat the whole person, you're going to lose some really valuable people in the workforce because they're just not going to be able to take it.
Yeah. We had a conversation on a podcast I was doing today, and they were talking about how do high performers sabotage the engagement of the people who report to them. And I said, that is such a duh, because no one can live up to it.
Yeah.
So Val, where has life taken you? I mean, you're so internally guided and joyful and energetic, and however that unfolded, I am sure that it left you with an abundance of ideas and stimulation and contacts and relationships and possibility. So how did you navigate the spinning world of, I just left a lifetime career and
well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I did, honestly. I think, candidly looking back on it now, I think I was very depressed, and I didn't, again, because I was so busy dealing with my dad's depression, because what his depression looked like was so severe. Mine was just, stress. I didn't have words for it. And so I think, like I said, as soon as I left, I got handed 2 consulting jobs with 2 great directors. And so I stayed in the game, but, I missed my job. I missed my desk. I missed my office. I missed my colleagues. So I don't know. I muddled through. I did. I just kept going and going and going. And I ended up with a pretty nice consulting career. And I got some very good opportunities to do some really fun things. Like I was hired by Disney a couple of years after I left Sony to run an entire campaign for them, the Pirates of the Caribbean campaign, which is a dream job because it was actually like my job, but just one movie instead of 30. So I got to do all the good fun stuff. And I loved it. And I love Disney. I'm a huge fan of that brand. So that was amazing. And I did that for a while. And then when that ended, actually, then I went to be an intern at Facebook, because Facebook was kind of just still starting. And I thought that was fascinating. I loved the idea of Facebook, and I still do. I think talking directly to consumers as a marketer and being able to, know what they want and speak to them and like an interactive conversation, I thought was fascinating. So I did that for a while. And then I went back to work again at a job, not a studio job, but at a big production company. And I had another big job working for, then I had a nice thing. I had a ski accident. Actually, it was when I met you. And I broke like 87 bones in my body and knocked myself out and almost died. So that year I just took, again, I guess I do know how to take care of myself. I just quit all my consulting jobs, and I basically went to that wedding I saw you at, spent a lot of time watching Homeland, and because I was kind of paralyzed on the right side, and then I had to do like a year of rehab to get my body back. So I did that. And then when that job was over, that's the point of this. Having sat because I kept thinking I was done, and having sat on the couch for a year, someone called me and said, will you come do a job again? And I was like, you know what? I've been sitting on the couch for a year. I will. So I went and worked at a great company, and we had some wonderful movies. And so I was privileged to work on 12 Years a Slave and with Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
And that was a high point. And then I decided that it might be a good idea to go and be an Imagineer, because I love Disneyland, and someone who I'd met during my tenure there at Pirates of the Caribbean was leaving and going to another role. So that turned out not to be my dream job. Really? And it was also, no, you know what? It just, what I thought it was going to be and what it wasn't, it just wasn't the right fit for me. I kind of went in at a level that didn't really make sense. It was sort of silly. Sometimes I do silly things, but I think at that point I kind of had the luxury I could do them. And so but I also, the other thing I learned is I knew I had made a mistake. I didn't continue to compound the mistake by sticking with it. So 3 months after I went to my boss and I said, look, I think you're great. This job's not really working for me. I don't think it's a good fit. And I left quite amicably. And then right after that, my father passed away. Actually, the Monday after I quit that job, my sister called and said, Dad's in the hospital. And so it gave me the luxury that I didn't have when my mom was dying, to be unemployed. And I think it was, who knows, fate, the spirits, my mother, but I was able to go be with my dad and spend time with him all the way through the end of his life with my sisters. And we all gathered together. We hadn't been together since my mother's funeral 6 years before, all of us, for such a protracted period of time. And then after that, I was like, now what do I do? And the director who had hired me the day I left Sony called me and said, can you come work on a big campaign for me? So I've always said I'm really lucky. Like when I'm kind of just sitting around, usually something will fall on my head. Mm-hmm. So that's what happened. And then blah, blah, blah. I've had other jobs since then, done other cool things since then. But yeah, now you find me in the pandemic, and things are actually a lot different. My consulting practice has been interesting, but I think the shift in our industry, I don't know what's going to happen next. So we'll see.
Depression Cake Company.
Depressed Cake Shop. So the Depressed Shop. It's okay. Depressed Cake Shop. So in that year before the ski accident, after Facebook, I was in London for Christmas, and I was as stressed as I always was, worried about my dad. And that Christmas cake pops had become a thing. And like I said, like any arts and craft, I will figure it out. So I was like, I'm going to learn how to make cake pops, and I'm going to make them for my family for Christmas. And they're impossible. Like they don't stay on the stick. And so anyway, I Google a lot. So I Googled and I found this cake shop, and they taught cake pops. So I went and took this Christmas cake pop class, and I learned how to make cake pops that I think looked like penguins. And I was honestly, I was addicted. I was like, this is going to be my life now. I'm going to be a cake decorator. And it was something I'd wanted to do since I was a kid, and I was not good at it. I'm still not. So I came home to my house in London, and I gathered my family around and all my friends. I'm like, cake pop, mania. And I just made cake pops the whole Christmas vacation. And then I found this blog this woman had, who was she was an experiential PR person, but she worked with a lot of food people. Too complicated to explain. Anyway, so she was doing something called the Depressed Cake Shop, which was going to be this one day charity cake shop, because as I said, I think earlier in this conversation, I'd gotten very interested in raising money and awareness around depression because of my dad. And so I thought, wow, cake and depression, how did that happen? Like, that's serendipitous. So I'd wanted to make some cakes for this pop-up cake shop. They're asking for volunteers. And then my dad became ill and I had to go home. I couldn't stay in London. I was constantly, back and forth from London, LA, London, and it was hard. Like it sounds like a first world problem, but it was very sad and scary. My dad was in very bad shape. And so I came home and this little Facebook group had grown up around this depressed cake shop idea. And a woman in LA posted that she wanted to do one in LA. And I was like, I need to do that. I just was called. I was like, I have to host my own depressed cake shop. I don't know why. So I texted her. We met at a kitchen supply store and we had breakfast. And we're like, okay, we're going to do a depressed cake shop. And then there were some women in San Francisco had actually done one too. So there was the first one in London and then the second one in San Francisco. So we emailed them and they gave us some advice. And the woman who had started the shop hadn't started a website or anything. So we started a website for her that morning and we built the website for her. And we had this cake shop. And I'm telling you, it was changed my life. Like I've always wanted to have my own shop. And we raised all this money and all our friends came and we got these amazing artists to like decorate these beautiful cookies because there's a concept behind the depressed cake shop, which is the cookies had to have an element of gray. Back then, everything was gray and everything was like a little bit darker. I kind of evolved a little because I'm a little sunnier. So now I like gray with a pop of color to represent that there's a gray cloud over your life when you're depressed, but with treatment, it's come out again. So color or a rainbow. So that's evolved since the kind of early was. But I just stuck with it and I loved it. And she moved on. She didn't want to do it anymore. And it became this kind of grassroots effort. And like we had cake shops in Singapore and it was all really just driven by Facebook. Like Instagram hadn't even started yet. And just our Facebook page and people found out about us and everybody volunteered. And little by little, I started making some merchandise and I just kept evolving it. And it's still really tiny. It's still just me, but we've had 200 shops around the world. We've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have a network of friends that I could never have imagined in my life, like the opportunities it's afforded me, people that share my value system and my calling. And so it's like a tribe that I never knew existed that has like enhanced my life in such a big way. So I feel like I live in two worlds. I live in the world of Hollywood and I'm still very interested in that. But I'm compassion and caring and making this world a better place. My father talked a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs when we were little kids. Do you know what that is?
I use it all the time in my work.
So it was like, I always wanted to get to actualization. Like and I'd covered all that stuff up. It's like, I had a house, I had safety, I had food, I had a career, I'd had approbation. Like I'd been awarded and rewarded for my career. And I was like, great. I've had enough attention, great, I don't need that anymore. I wanted to give back. And he always taught us that when you give back, you will have a much richer and better life. And it's totally true. Like I love this project with all of my heart.
Amen, sis. I am so glad you're on this planet. Truly. And I'm glad for the work that you're doing. Is there some place that you would like people to know to find you if they want to get in touch for whatever?
It's really easy. You can find us at www.depressedcakeshop.org because we're a 501c3 now. I finally filed for 501c3 status at the beginning of 2020, awkwardly timed. And we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, sort of on Twitter. I'm not very good at Twitter, so we don't have, I cancel my Twitter game strong. And what I'm trying to do candidly is Mental Health Month is in May, and we're probably not going to have a lot of opportunity to pop up. So I'm doing a campaign called Make Mental Health Month Sweet. I would like home bakers, bakeries, restaurants, anybody who wants to create a depressed bake shop good, sell it and give the money to a mental health charity. The other thing that makes Depressed Cake Shop unique is, although we can take donations, I like the idea of local charities who don't have like a marketing, it's hard to market yourself when you're a charity, to be able to keep the money in their community for the hardworking local people who are, taking care of in their own backyard. So sure. And they can email me, info@depressedcakeshop.com or val@depressedcakeshop.com. I'm always there. And we like to have anybody involved, even if they have questions, or thoughts or things they want to contribute. They should get in touch.
Awesome. Well, so quick side notes. I'm kicking off a mastermind to help people uncover some of the insights that Val has lived by, her access to joy, her connection to self, and her ability to have that be a strength and how she navigated her career by passion, and how now that you've given yourself more freedom, it continues to be kind of your guiding light. So if you're interested in that, you can go into Balance Integration and click on Game Change Book. And it's starting Tuesday, so you better hurry because I only have a couple spots left. So I have one parting question for you, and I'm copying someone who works for me, whose podcast I was on this morning, and she closed her podcast. I thought this was so beautiful with, I choked up. What are 3 things that you're grateful for?
Oh gosh. I'm mostly grateful for my health, because I've seen that without health, you have nothing. I'm grateful for my capacity to forgive. I think that's a gift in this world. And I'm very grateful for my friends and family, because I think without them, what's the point?
Well, I celebrate everything you're grateful for. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much. Everyone, come back next week. I forget who I have lined up, but I'm great. And Val's great. So everyone, have a great night.
I'll see you in the real world sometime soon.
Yes.